Welcome to our 8th ever Art Slides lecture. It's been a while since we've done this, hasn't it? Do you all dread listening to these? I definitely don't dread recording them. Anyway, today's topic is Roman art, specifically Imperial Roman art. This means that the pieces we're looking at today come from the Roman Empire, as opposed to the Roman Republic. As we've already seen, a lot of the art from the Roman Republic centered on making copies of Greek art. Some of today's art will come from the Republic, but most of it was made during or after the reign of Augustus, during the Pax Romana. You will notice that we move from labeling years with BCE, or before Common Era, to CE, meaning Common Era. These mean essentially the same thing as BC and AD. We will see several examples of Roman architecture today. We categorize Roman architecture into various groups such as domestic, public, religious, and commemorative. This example of religious architecture is the oldest in today's slides. The temple of Portness was dedicated to the god Portness, who was believed to protect the city's gates, locks, and harbors. This temple displays a blending of Greek and Etruscan styles. Notice the pediment and entablature at the top. These should look familiar from our study of Greek temples. The columns, too, are in the Greek Ionic style. Etruscan influence can be seen in the deeper porch, which was later seen as a metaphor for the emperor's dominance over the city. One key difference in this temple is its pseudo-peripteral style. The peripteral style just means that the perimeter of the temple is surrounded by freestanding columns, such as in the Parthenon. This temple is called pseudo-peripteral because, while it is surrounded by columns, the columns along the side and back are not freestanding. Instead, they are engaged or embedded within the wall of the temple. This is a style that will be repeated often throughout Roman architecture. This next slide is perhaps one of the most impressive. The Pont du Gard is an aqueduct built by the Roman Empire in France. Remember that the empire stretched well beyond the Mediterranean as far up as England. They built many aqueducts, but this is perhaps the best preserved example. It is a good example of the Romans' ability to combine both utility and beauty. Aqueduct means water mover, and at one point the Pont du Gard would have supported a pipeline that would have carried water from 30 miles away. To achieve this, the entire pipeline is built on a slight decline from its beginning point to its end. While providing this necessary service, it also served as a bridge for those traveling across the river. The aqueduct is constructed of 3 tiers of vault arches. A curious function of vault arches is that they are self-supporting when constructed well. This means that the stones that comprise the arches fit together so well that they do not need mortar or clamps to be held together. Even after the aqueduct was no longer needed, the Pont du Gard remained in use as a bridge and was therefore well maintained. Moving away from architecture briefly, we have a statue of a patrician with 2 ancestors, a piece that I feel is appropriate for us to study on the week of Halloween. It's pretty weird. Not only is this guy holding 2 heads, those 2 heads are meant to represent his dead family to whom he prays. Patricians, as you should recall, are wealthier members of Roman society, often engaged in higher levels of politics. Portraiture during this period was very important to the wealthy members of society. This particular portrait displays not only this, but also the importance that Romans placed on family and genealogy. Notice how the lines of the toga serve to draw our eyes to the man's head and both of the busts, seamlessly linking them all together to reflect a connection to the past. Our next slide is the Areopagus, or Altar of Peace. It is an example of commemorative architecture. Dedicated to the Roman god of peace, Pax, the altar is meant to commemorate the peace of Augustus. Ironically enough, it was placed on a training field dedicated to Mars, the god of war. The open-air altar recalls a more primitive time in Roman religion. The reliefs on the outside of the enclosure were done in a classical Greek style, although they depict Roman subjects. The images serve largely as propaganda. Augustus is depicted as the Pontifex Maximus, or high priest, performing a religious rite and situating himself not only as the city's political leader, but also its religious leader. The reliefs also depict a number of children, reflecting Augustus' desire for Roman citizens to produce a strong line of cultural heirs. Another piece of propaganda, the Augustus of Prima Porta. Like most propaganda, it might look fairly simple, but there are a lot of messages under the metaphorical surface. First, notice that this is an idealized version of Augustus. He's young and fit, and therefore capable of leading. While it is a likeness of Augustus, this is not how he appeared for most of his reign. He was 76 when he died and ended his reign. Without television or photographs, emperors could have artists depict them in whatever way they wanted, and the public would remain largely unaware of their actual appearance. Second, Augustus is portrayed as both a general and an orator. His stance, with his arm outstretched, indicates that he is addressing a crowd, but his clothing displays his military power, thus giving us an image of a wise and strong leader, competent in both laws and wars. Lastly, notice the naked baby riding a dolphin. That's not just any naked baby riding a dolphin, that's Cupid. Cupid's presence is meant to indicate that Augustus is descended from Aeneas, son of Venus, and is thereby related to the gods. Not a power trip at all. The Colosseum is arguably the most famous Roman structure. This falls into the category of public architecture. It is best known as the place where gladiators fought, but a lot of other entertaining displays took place there as well. Common displays included execution ad bestia, in which unarmed criminals were torn apart by large exotic animals, hunting parties, or artistic recreations of natural places or events. Sometimes these events included elaborate sets with plants, buildings, and other props. It is also known that on occasion, the whole staging area would be flooded for swimming competitions. On one such occasion, small boats were used to recreate a famous sea battle between the Greeks and the Corinthians. The Colosseum was built during the Flavian dynasty by Emperor Vespasian. It was given its name after the colossal statue of Nero that used to stand next to it. It is built around a concrete core with 3 stories of arcades forming the facade. The arches on the first level arcade feature Tuscan columns, a later form of the Doric style. The second floor columns are Ionic, and the third floor are Corinthian. Arranged around the upper wall are sockets to which large canvases could be attached, providing shade for spectators. Inside the Colosseum, the stands could hold up to 50,000 spectators. Interior stairs and corridors guided spectators through the building with numbered gates to mark seating sections. Our next slide is a relief sculpture from the Arch of Titus. Among Rome's pieces of commemorative architecture are a number of celebratory victory arches. The Arch of Titus celebrates Titus's conquering of Jerusalem. Titus was sent by his father, Emperor Vespasian, to end a Jewish rebellion. This particular relief sculpture depicts the triumphal procession after Jerusalem was sacked. The soldiers can be seen carrying off booty from the city. Most prominent is the large menorah being carried by several men. The menorah is a sacred object in Jewish religion and is given special attention here, as it indicates that Rome is more powerful than the Jewish religion. This image came to be a symbol of the Jewish diaspora. Interestingly enough, this image of a menorah served as the model for the emblem of the State of Israel in the 20th century, when the nation of Israel returned to Jerusalem. Colossal columns were also another common way to commemorate a military victory. Trajan's column is one of the most impressive. Trajan, if you'll recall, is the second of the 5 good emperors. This column commemorates his victory over the Dacians, who lived along the Danube River in modern-day Romania. The 30-meter tall column consists of marble drums stacked on top of one another. Inside is a spiral staircase that leads to the viewing platform. Initially, it was topped by a statue of Trajan, but this disappeared sometime in the Middle Ages. It is now topped by a statue of Pope Sixtus V, which was installed in 1587. The exterior features a spiraling relief sculpture that depicts the narrative of Rome defeating the Dacians. It is unknown how this relief would have been viewed by Romans at the time, but it is suspected that they may have viewed it from one of the 2 libraries that used to flank the column on either side. If the Colosseum is the most famous structure from ancient Rome, then the Pantheon is probably the second most famous. Built during the reign of Hadrian, one of the 5 good emperors, the Pantheon displays both Greek and Roman architectural conventions. Its name means Temple of All Gods, and was a site of Roman worship. It is now a Catholic basilica. Outside, Corinthian columns support a triangular pediment and large portico. Inscribed along the pediment is the name Marcus Agrippa, a friend of Augustus, who had dedicated a temple on this site decades before. From the outside, it appears distinctly Greek. Once inside, however, the building becomes distinctly Roman. The interior of the Pantheon is a rotunda, or a building with a circular structure. The main room features a large concrete dome. The dome and circular room are perfectly proportioned. The distance from the top of the dome to the floor is equal to the diameter of the room. In the center of the dome is the building's only light source, a hole in the center called an oculus, meaning eye. The oculus lets in a single beam of light that travels around the room throughout the day. The dome is lined with 5 coffered bands that grow smaller as they approach the oculus, giving the illusion of greater height. The coffers were originally painted blue to mimic the sky. Looking at the Pantheon, we can see several ways in which its architecture has influenced early American architecture. Most of our government buildings feature a central rotunda, most notably the Capitol Building in Washington, D.C. The Jefferson Monument, which sits near the Lincoln Memorial, which, if you recall, looks remarkably like the Parthenon, is almost an exact copy of the Pantheon. Its interior dome is identical with the exception of the oculus. So, a building used for worship of Roman gods served as the inspiration for a building to memorialize a founding father. And we think that the Romans were dumb for believing that Augustus was descended from gods. But here we are with what looks essentially like a temple built to some dead white guy. I find that a little odd, but I'll let you make of it what you will.